appeal of all the sides. So yours is customized for you, although it's still kind of the same thing I typically use. I'll get to this in a minute, but the main focus of what was asked me to cover is this idea of strategic planning, and we'll spend the majority of our time there. But I kind of want to start in a little more general fashion. We'll talk about leadership in general. We'll kind of do this, if you will. Start with big funnel, work our way down to some smaller stuff, and we'll end up spending a lot of our time on the nuts and bolts of strategic planning and what that is and what it's for and sort of thing. So I will tell you, I'm used to teaching college kids. I teach at UNC and CSU, this similar class to this. They will ask me 5 bazillion questions in an hour. So I'm used to that. So if you have things you want to talk about or just things you want to comment on, you're welcome to do that along the way. I'd be more than happy to entertain questions. So this is not a lecture class. I actually hate that. Okay?
Yeah, I don't waste much time. Is it not working?
It's okay, Dale already has questions.
Well, actually, I don't know that it's you. It doesn't want to change slides. I actually don't think it likes your system.
So they ask so many questions, you only have the first slide.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
We work off of that.
Yeah.
We have to do it the hard way, we'll do it the hard way. Okay. There we go. Yep.
Okay, try that now.
It just doesn't like to talk to my machine. That's okay. This is just a real quick summary, kind of some of the things that I've been involved in on the corporate side of things in this world. And actually, there's only really one reason why I even show you that stuff, and I certainly am not going to go through it. And the reason I say all this stuff is really, it boils down to this. I've been given more opportunities to goof things up than most people you know. I mean, that's really what's reflected when you have people's careers. I've been very fortunate. I've had some good mentors along the way. I've worked for some companies that were in great states of flux, which provides opportunity. And that is not always fun stuff, but there is opportunity when there's great change going on with organizations. I've worked for companies that are private equity owned for 15, 18 years now. And that private equity world is a very different world as well. And that's a different way of managing business. So in a lot of ways, that's exposed me to things that I probably never would have seen otherwise. I had owned my own business for a number of years, bought, sold several of those along the way, and finally started working for corporate organizations where I've continued to buy and sell companies along the way. It's like you can never get out of that loop. So anyway, that gives you just a quick idea of some things I've done. So I know there's a million ways to define leadership, and there's a bazillion books out there talking about. Everybody has a different opinion on what leadership is. You know, you talk about Maxwell stuff. It's one perspective. I mean, everybody has these different ideas. In my world, I try to juxtapose a couple of things to get a definition. Okay, because most people I find who think they're leading are managing, and it's really hard to go from one to the other. So if you look at this list of things, this gives you, it jumped all by itself. There it is. This idea of leadership, it's a little more fungible. Okay? The idea of leadership is a process. It's going from a place to a place, and it's not always a blacktop road. And there's a lot of crazy things that may happen along the way. If you look at it conversely from the management perspective, the idea of management is to accomplish very specific things. So it's almost like, you're given a pile of things as a leader, and you've got to make something out of it that isn't necessarily obvious. As a manager, you're given processes, systems, people, organizations, and your goal is to maximize those things. So that's kind of the difference between these two. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of these things on the left side as we go forward. We'll talk quite a bit more about the vision concept. We'll talk a lot more about this influence idea, but I can give you an example of that I just left. It's a time of year where we're in the middle of budget season, and we have just finished a strategic planning model, which we do every 6 months in our company. Now is the time where we take those strategies we've devised and we roll those back out. So we've taken input from our entire company, and now we've put all that together and we've rolled that back out. So this is the time of year I go division to division. I was in California all week last week, going to our divisions there. I'm doing that in Colorado this week, and having conversations. So it's not just about nuts and bolts. So one of the things we're doing in our groups is we've said, hey, we need to communicate better, and we have to do that intentionally. We have to have a plan to communicate intentionally as a group. Okay. Well, here's a structure, managers, that I want you to use. But let's talk about the intent of that. So my job is to get them to understand what are we really trying to accomplish, and how will that help us as a company grow and be successful. Their job is then to take the tool and to implement it, to make sure everyone else is implementing below them and to work through the organization. So there's a difference there. So this idea of leveraging influence, I'm talking to them today. I spent an hour and a half with them this morning, talking to them about the concepts and how I see the business evolving. Okay, so maybe that helps show you a little bit of the difference between those two. The last thing there I think is a big thing, this idea of it never being satisfied. A leader is never really satisfied with where you are today. One of the things I talk to our folks about constantly is, if you think we can be successful doing it exactly the same way tomorrow as we did today, you are wrong. It's a question of time until we have a failure, whether catastrophic or less so. One of my jobs is to find companies to buy. The company that owns us out of Dallas, Texas, well, they bought us as a platform company, and they want to do what's called bolt-ons. They want to go buy other companies, grow our platform nationwide. So part of my job is to vet organizations that we might purchase when we go through this process. I've talked to, this is just in the last 60 days, I've talked to 4 companies that want to sell. None of them are making any money. They're all train wrecks, because they have not been willing to be unsatisfied. They're going to do it the way they do it. This is how we do it. I sat across from a guy in a meeting about a month ago. Very nice gentleman. I tried to deal with him respectfully. He was offended that we wouldn't make an offer on his company. And the last thing we talked about, I told him, I'll see you at auction. I'll buy you at auction, buddy. I'm telling you, you've got problems that are not solved, and you're not going to solve them thinking the way you're thinking. You have to think about, how can we be better? How can we improve? And if you don't, you get run over. Don't think it's any different in the church. Don't think it's any different in the school. The world is changing, and I recognize we have to be very careful that doctrinally we don't move. But means and methods are different conversations. I find it very interesting that just a few years ago, there would not have been a television there on the back screen to allow me to look at my slide to talk to you. We hadn't embraced technology in this organization. Now we have. I remember the first time I taught at the University of Northern Colorado a few years ago. I was standing there, and the kids started asking me a lot of questions about the company, and I thought, how do they know all this stuff to ask? I was a moron. Well, they had my website. The company website was up on the screen behind me, and some guy's in the middle. His job is to run, they call it running the bullpen. His job is to decide what content goes on the screen for the speaker of the day. So they're all online, like you would be, looking at the website, asking questions about the company, and I went, well, boy, howdy, I guess things are moving along a little fast. So this is the idea we're talking about. We're talking about never being satisfied as a leader. How can you improve? And it doesn't have to be huge things. One of the things we talked about with our folks this morning, the group I talked to today, one of our goals as a company is 10% earnings, EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. They're at about 8.5. they need 1.5 points to hit goal. 1.5%. They're not going to do anything huge and significant to achieve that. They're going to do 50 little things that much better. And that will add up in quarter points or tenths of points to reach that 10% goal. That's how they're going to resolve that. So that's a concept I think you should really think about when you start thinking about being an effective leader. So here's some characteristics, and I really just want to focus on 2 or 3 of these. We could talk all day about this, but I know you've already done that, so I don't really want to go through all that. But this idea of vision, let's start there for a minute. I had a friend years ago, he was a home builder, he built semi-custom home and custom homes. Very successful guy. I don't know, guy probably sold $40, $50 million worth of homes every year back in the day when things were going really well. And I found it interesting. I did a lot of work for him on the construction side, and when we go to his sites, and he'd have these, at the time, they were $500,000 to $1 million homes. Those were, 20 years ago, that was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money in my world, but relatively speaking, it was a lot of money for a home. And if you came in to buy the home, you'd come in, and it was finished. All the surfaces were done, the carpet was in, the countertops were in, but the expectation was that you would have input then on the finishes. So I asked him, I said, I don't get it. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but why would you finish the home and then have somebody come in and you finish it again? He said, because people can't see it. They can't see it finished. They walk in here, and if it's not finished, we don't sell them. Even if it's finished a way they don't like, they need to be able to see it, because so few people have vision and can see it finished. One of the really, really hard things for a leader to do is to see it finished. I can see our company in my head 5 years from now. I know what it looks like. I know where we're working. I know the kind of work we're doing. I even know where some of the people we have working for us right now have moved up to. I see that in my head. But it's a challenge every day to do that, to have vision. There was a question here, and I'm sorry, I just didn't want to overlook it.
What kind of contracting did you do? Was you general?
Yeah, site work. Yeah, so it's infrastructure stuff, horizontal stuff, asphalt, concrete, grading, drainage, some utility work.
So it wasn't home construction or business?
We would do the development prior to the homes going in. I got that. Right, so we do the overlot work and everything leading up to, the guys coming and put the home on.
How successful was the contractor? Because I grew up in home construction, so I understand that, but how I could see the advantage of making a finished product before somebody walked in so that they could say, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that, I wanted a darker color. That's a tremendous amount of expense.
Yeah. Well, he lived in about a $5 million home, so I guess he made a nickel or two along the way. He had the largest private home building company, outside of the big boys in Nashville at the time.
Wow.
So he'd done really well. His father started, his mother kind of became the matriarch that ran the company, and he was the heir apparent.
That's just unheard of. I was a trim carpenter, and there were many, many times we would spend 2 days building a fireplace mantle and this great elaborate thing, and the person walks in, I don't like it. Yeah. And it goes right back.
And they might have approved the plans.
Yeah, they did. Mm-hmm. They brought us the picture. I want this.
And that's the point. They looked at the set of drawings, but they couldn't convert that. Mm-hmm. They couldn't see it finished. And until they actually saw it finished, they didn't have the ability to visualize that.
It matches the picture, but that doesn't match my countertop.
That's not what I thought. That's not what I thought it would be. I didn't think it would be that. So that's the point. This idea of leadership requires a significant amount of vision, and vision isn't something everyone has, and that's okay. The second bullet I want to kind of focus on for a minute is this concept of perspective. I think that's probably one of the hardest things for leaders to do. It's because you really need perspective when? When is the time when perspective is most valuable? If you're the leader.
Your problem?
Yeah. When the heat's on, and frankly, when everybody else in the organization has lost it. When they've lost perspective because you've got some issue that's going on, some situation that's occurring. How do you keep perspective? I was asked a number of years ago, the company I was working for had a large presence in the Dallas market, and I was asked at one point to go and actually get us as a company out of the Dallas market. We had 3 divisions there, 180 employees, something like that. We were running probably $75, $80 million worth of work out of that market. Had to go to town and shut down the organization. 180 people without work. We had millions of dollars worth of bonded projects, which means they're insured. And if you default on that, there are significant ramifications. So basically, we had to tell a bunch of people, you're going to be out of a job, but we need you to finish this work as fast as you can. The faster you finish it, the faster you're out of a job. Really? Try having that conversation with folks. That's a challenge. So the guys that I had running the business there, obviously we wanted to keep them engaged as long as possible. So it was a daily conversation to help them maintain perspective. What are we trying to achieve? You're going to get bonused at the end of this thing. I'm going to help you find another job. In the interim, we've got to keep our people engaged. We've got to finish this bonded work. We're going to make sure we don't leave any, dead bodies along the way here. We're going to make sure we get this done right. And the problems of the day and the emotional baggage that came with I'm going to lose my job was really weighing heavy on those guys. So, twice a week we had lunch, and my job was to pull them back a little bit. All right, boys, I understand what's going on. What are we trying to achieve here? Let's keep perspective. Is that as catastrophic as it sounds? Or have people just got you so spun up that you're buying the stuff they're selling? It's okay. So it's really a challenge.
So you're saying one of the keys, to make sure I understand, how to keep perspective by kind of just keeping people focused on the goal? Is that kind of?
I think that's a lot of it, yeah. And understanding how impacting the things that are happening really are. Right? So how do we typically analyze situations? When we look at a situation, we say, you know what could happen? It could all crash down into a heap. Right? That's our risk assessment. We assess things based on worst case scenario. People in organizations do that as well. And it's contagious. You know what? We have a problem with eldership. And this elder is a problem. This entire church could implode and fall into ashes. Okay? Wouldn't argue it's possible, but let's back up and keep perspective. What's the most likely outcome? Right? So if we invest in a different market, we're investing in a new market right now. It's going to cost us several $1 million worth of equipment and get people on the ground and all this stuff. I'm looking at that market and I'm saying, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Okay? What's the best thing that could happen? What's the most likely thing that will happen? And I think that's part, to answer your question, of how you keep perspective. Let's keep things in context. Understanding that there are rails to this on the positive and negative side, but what's probable? And let's kind of focus on that. So, yeah, it's a step back kind of thing. Okay. And then really the third one I want to focus on for a minute is this idea of creativity. And I used the example of the Texas thing on purpose because I wanted to work into this one. But so at the time when I was asked to do this thing in Texas, company where there's a lot of volatility going on. In the middle of the instructions, the CEO was removed and sent packing. It was really a challenging time. So I found myself sitting in a conference room in Dallas, Texas, with 180 employees, a facility that's $30,000 a month, several hundred pieces of equipment, and thinking, okay, this is going to cost a lot of money to shut this down. You don't just turn switches off. There's money involved. So my budget was about $1.2 million. I thought it cost us about $1.2 million to get out of the market. And that's if everything went right and you held your mouth right. So didn't really have any great direction as to how to do this. So one of the things was, out of these 3 divisions that were there, one of them had some street value. And it looked like something we could sell. So I packaged that division up, called some companies I knew, the guys that ran the companies, and said, private auction, 3 of you boys are in. If you're interested, come look at the equipment, come look at the jobs, and we're going to do an auction. We'll see whichever one of you wins buys this division. Sold it for about $750,000. That was not part of the plan. I was told by the director out of Chicago, get us out of Texas now. Figure it out. Click. He didn't say, see if you can minimize the downside of the cost. But I'm thinking, $1.2 million is a lot of money. We're already getting out of here because we're not making money. So let's see if we can mitigate that. So this idea of creativity, I think that's kind of the art of leadership, if you will. It's not always cut and dry. It's not always clear the direction. You're going to be given tenets. You're going to be given point that way. But there's creativity that comes into place to how you do your job as a leader. The conversations you have, the way you structure when you're preaching for a living and you're having a conversation with an eldership and you think maybe there's a different way to do it. How are you going to have that conversation? I mean, there's just lots of details in leadership. And this idea of taking something and making it different than everyone thinks it will be. Or maybe thinking of a different way to do something no one else has thought about. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but at the same time, be willing to sit back and look at what you've been given and see if the puzzle can go together a different way. I think that creativity thing is severely lacking in leadership across our country. And I don't just mean in the private sector, I mean everywhere. Any questions about that stuff so far, or any of those others that I wasn't taking the time for?
What did it cost you to get out?
About 400. Mitigated about 400. Better than $1.2 million. And they didn't give me a bonus out of the 800 we saved. Okay, so here's some questions for you. First one's a thought question, and I want to ask you that now, and I want you to give me an answer after you think about it for a second. There it is.
There's the alarm.
On time. Do you think leaders are born or made? I got one made.
Made.
Got a maid?
Made.
Made.
Both.
Both?
Made.
Any borns?
Born.
One born. So a bunch of maids, one born, and one both.
Different type of made.
This is another one of those things that you will find is in great debate. Bob could attest to that. How many places do you read one or the other? A lot of people have very specific, I am certain it is this, I am certain it is that. I will tell you, I think it's both.
Yes.
That's just, look, I mean, this is my opinion, okay? And you can find 10 more that would conflict with this, so that's all it is. But there are certain inherent qualities of really strong leaders. And you have known some of them, or you will know some of them. Certain people, when they walk in the room, they own it. That's not made. There are just certain attributes to certain people. They come into leadership as a natural extension of who they are. It's easier for them. It's obvious for them. Of course I'm going to be the leader, they would say. Why wouldn't I be? Then there's the rest of us who say, I want to be a leader. This is going to be a lot of work. I got to figure this out. And I got a lot of holes to backfill. I think that's more prevalent. Now, part of the challenge I think you have with leaders who are born with a lot of leadership characteristics is they're not taught very easily. And they believe that they've got it figured out because it's come easy to them. And I see this happen often. Of course I'm a leader. What do you mean you don't agree with me? You must be an idiot. It's that kind of a thing. It can turn into an arrogance. So one of the things I talk to our folks about constantly is, look, a leadership track in your life is a process. And you will never arrive. I've told my wife this for years. Every year of my life, I look back and think, I was a moron last year. And I keep thinking that's going to stop. I turned 50 in a week. It hasn't stopped yet. I'm still a moron. Because, and I hope it never stops, because I want to keep learning and I want to keep improving. And I have to look honestly at myself and say, what did I do that I need to do differently? It wasn't as effective as it could be. So anyway, that's my answer to that question. Whether or not it's right or not, you can determine. So, you will all have opportunities to be leaders in your life. A minister at a congregation is obviously a leadership role. Whether you want it to be or not, it is. So you have to ask yourself the question, do you really want to be a leader? This is where it really gets interesting, guys. This is soul-searching stuff. Okay? It's not easy to be the leader. It's not about glory, and it's not about attention. It's hard. If you do it right, it's hard. How do you think the general manager for the Kansas City Chiefs feels right now? One of his players walked up to him, said, "Thank you," turned around, and as he walked away, went, boom! And the guy fell down dead in front of him. Now, I understand that's an extreme, but I'm telling you, it's really hard to be a leader. And if you're not really dedicated to doing it, you will not be a good leader. You have to understand what all comes with that package. It's really a challenging thing. It's a very rewarding thing. But don't assume it's going to be all fun and games and you just get to be the boss.
I'm sorry, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, Kansas City Chiefs.
Gentleman that played for the Kansas City Chiefs 2 weeks ago reached a point in his life he couldn't cope.
Oh, okay.
He shot his girlfriend in front of his child and his mother, walked to the Kansas City Chiefs practice facility, went up to the coach, Romeo Cornell, and the general manager of the team, said, "Thank you very much, but I can't take it anymore." And he turned around to walk into the parking lot. They had called the police as he stood there and talked. Police pulled up, and he shot himself in the parking lot right in front.
Oh, okay.
There are just hard things that happen when you're a leader, and you hear about things. Look, if you knew half of what the eldership at this place has had to deal with, you would probably say, "Oh, well, if I ever want to do that." It's really some hard stuff. I've been in some of those conversations with them about different things over the years. They're hard things. I was in a conversation with the elders a number of years ago on a specific issue. I'll never forget Maynard Willie, the look on his face, and he said, "Man, this is so hard." He had tears in his eyes. It's hard to be a leader. So I think you have to ask yourself that question. And then ask yourself, where do you really fit? Everybody's not cut out to be leader at the top. Maybe there's a leadership role in the middle. Maybe there are different places you can lead. One of the biggest challenges of corporate America is your top performers always want to be the leader. They want to go to the next level. They're not as qualified to do that. But we have a tendency to give them a shot at it. I had a gentleman work for me years ago. His wife works for me now, amazingly enough, 20 years later. His name is Jim Overland. He's probably one of the best field managers, ops managers in construction I've ever had work for me. I can't remember the guy ever losing money on a job in a decade. He's unbelievable. He says he's so good at what he does. And he said, "You know what? I want to be a project manager. I think I've earned the right. I'd like to be considered for a project manager role." He said, "You're right, you have." I pulled him in, made him a project manager. 2 months later, I was having a conversation with a guy at lunch, and he said, "Hey, G, you hear Jim's leaving?" "What do you mean Jim's leaving? What are you talking about?" "Yeah, he can't take it. He hates his job. He's leaving." Okay. So I called Jim and said, "Man, what are you doing? Because I need to have a conversation with you now." So we went and had a late lunch. And I said, "What's up?" I said, "Man," he said, I think I have an ulcer. I can't take it. So I hate coming in the office. It's just piles of paperwork, piles of financials. I just can't take it. I'm going to so-and-so to go to work. I said, "Well, you don't have to do that. You want to go back and run in the field? I can do that." "Well, you're only the most successful guy we've had in a decade doing that, so I'm thinking you could probably go back and do that if you'd like." Okay, I'll do that. Right? It's understandable that there's this feeling of wanting to move up, but at the same time, you have to be candid with yourself. You know, it took Jim almost losing his mind before he finally said, where do I really fit in the organization? And he said, what do I really enjoy? Well, I don't enjoy looking at financials, and I don't enjoy Murphy coming down here asking me why my job's upside down. I don't have control over it anymore. It's out in the field, and I can't see it, and it's making me crazy, and it took me a while to get through that. And the next question you have to ask yourself, where do you want to be? And what do you ultimately want to do with yourself? Let me ask you a question. How many of you know what you're going to do when you leave this school right now? Half. Okay. That's better than the last class, Bob.
Yes.
There were 2 out of the last group that had a clue. What? You want to be somewhere? That's on purpose too. Don't get me wrong. I understand God puts you where he wants to put you. But it doesn't mean you sit around and go, I'll wait until a bolt comes out of heaven and knocks me in the head. That's how I'll determine where I go. There's an intentional ability that you have to make yourself be that. Go there. Last thing, what are you going to do to get there? So let's assume you have answered the question. Yes, I do want to be able to leave. Some level. So how am I going to do that? I'm sorry that's small. It's really small for me. Here are some things to think about when you begin to go through this process. And remember, it is a process. This is intentional. You're not going to sit around and absorb stuff and wake up one day and go, well, boy, howdy, I'm a really good leader now. It's not going to happen that way. You're going to have to do it on purpose. In education, what leadership is and does, I really appreciate you doing this class. I think this is a good thing. It's a good thing for us to have to teach it, because we have to think about it. It's a good thing for you to hear it, because you're going to get perspectives all over the board, and I'm sure you'll hear conflicting information, but at the same time, it helps you get a sense of all that's out there. I've told my kids, I told Maddie this, she's a freshman in college. Here's why college is important. I don't remember a lot of the stuff I learned in college, because I didn't really learn it. I learned enough for a test. Got it. I mean, I've had to go back. Part of the way our company is judged is on ratios. So we have leverage ratios, total debt ratios, those kinds of things. I kind of remember talking about all that stuff in managerial accounting, but I don't have the formulas memorized for all that stuff. I had to go back and brush up on those, because I have to run those numbers every month to see where we fall with our senior lenders. But the idea is, I learned about what's out there. My eyes were opened. I didn't even know a lot of this stuff existed. I didn't know there were all these different management styles of how you manage a company. My degree is in business management, marketing with an economics minor. I had no idea this stuff even existed. I mean, I walked out of classes going, I think I'm way behind. I didn't even know what he was talking about. You know, and there was a certain expectation that you would have a baseline of what was happening in the world. Man, I didn't have a clue. So I left college thinking, man, okay, I'm starting to get a little bit of a feel for what's out here at least, right? And I think that's what you do with leadership. There's a lot of information out there. Just listen, talk, ask, go. You get in the middle of this concept, and you start to gather pieces of data. And it kind of helps you form your own leadership style, your own training regimen, those kinds of things, okay? So the second thing, and this is the hardest one on the list, you have to do a self-assessment. We all think we do, but the truth of it is, we don't. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in a 360-degree review. It's a senior management thing. It was all trendy about 10 years ago, where you take everybody that directly reports to you in the next level past that, and you do a survey to ask them how you are doing as a senior manager. That is no fun. I'm telling you right now. You think you're self-assessing. I'm looking in the mirror saying, boy, you know, I really got to work on this and work on this. But I'm pretty good at this. And the assessment comes back from 30 people. And the thing you said you were pretty good at, they're like, that guy's a goof. He has no idea about that. And you go, what? How can that be? That was on my strength list. And I know the other stuff doesn't go on the strength list. The strength list is whittling down quickly. But this is a real challenge. Do a self-assessment. Where are you really today?
I went through one of those on a small scale, and you got to be grounded before you can go into it. Because when you come out, I mean, it's like you've had the bats put to you.
Makes you jump off the building. Yep. It's not any fun.
It's tough.
But ultimately, if you look at it correctly, it's good. But you got to end up swallowing your pride. And really, that's the barrier to this. I mean, that's the hard thing. It's, what's the barrier to Christianity? Pride itself. It's no different from most good things. I mean, leadership, if you can swallow your pride, you're going to be probably pretty good. But it's hard to do that because you begin to believe your own press clippings. People call you sir a lot. And they defer to you. Don't think it doesn't happen. It's easy for it to happen. So, part of your development process is a self-assessment. And then preparing, and I touched on this a minute ago. Training, mentoring, listening, doing, you got to get in the middle of it. You've got to be willing to ask questions. When you get the answer, you don't dismiss it because it disagrees with your personal baseline. Truth is truth, whether you believe it or not. Applies to leadership as well as the doctrinal aspect. Identification of opportunities. There are opportunities out there. I find it interesting that once we develop to a certain point in our careers, we sometimes pass over opportunities because we think they're beneath our skill set now. It happens. But there's nothing beneath your skill set. If there's a need and it's legitimate and you have the capability, that's an opportunity for you. Take it. Do your best. And maybe you crush it because you're that good. Great. It doesn't have to be something that's going to stretch you to your limit for it to be something you're willing to do. Look for opportunity. Willingness to lead for the right reasons. This is really, honestly, I don't think it's a big deal with you guys. I mean, you're here out of your heart, for the most part. You're not here to make a pile of money. You're not. I mean, there's other ways to do those things. This is frankly more of a problem, I think, in the corporate world, but I think it can move potentially into the world that you inhabit as well. I've known a couple of preachers who I think had moved to this place where they were not leading for the right reason. And once again, it's a pride question. But front cover of the Wall Street Journal yesterday, probe widens into insider trading accusations. So a lot of these guys running, these Fortune 500 companies that are all publicly traded, they've known their third and fourth quarter results were going to stink, so they started selling their stock. It's a problem. It's insider trading. It's taking advantage of information that no one else has to manipulate your stock price. Why are they doing that? What's their motivation to lead? Apparently there's a problem there. And you can go and put them all on a couch and ask them why they hate their mother and try to figure it out. But ultimately, it's basic things. It's greed, it's power, it's pride, it's those kinds of things. Those are the reasons why you want to lead. You won't be effective. You'll make everybody else's life miserable. It's not the thing to do. So you have to ask that question. Next thing is this idea, and this is a cultural question, and this happens in a lot of places. Okay, this is very much a church thing. It's not just in the private sector. When you make a mistake, it's yours. It's no one else's. You've got to own it, man. You want to be a successful leader, and you don't own your mistakes. You're fooling yourself. You've undermined yourself. No one else respects you. They're only deferring to your position, not to you as a leader. You can so quickly mess up your influence if you don't own your mistakes. Because everyone else knows it was yours. You can talk yourself into it all day long. I don't think that's really my fault. If you're running the show, it's yours. Absolutely huge. We had a problem in our company. We've got this software that we run. I don't actually like it. And when I came to a company to run it, it's what they had, and they spent a lot of money on it, so we made it work. But the reporting aspect of that software is onerous. It makes you crazy. And ultimately, we can get the reports out of it. But we're asking our staff, our management staff, field staff that runs operations, to generate a lot of that reporting through the system. Well, here's how it happens. Every week, it's a requirement in our company, we have what's called one-on-ones. Everybody has a one-on-one with their direct report every week. I have 5 direct reports every week, and I had it on a conference call from my office to here with my guy that runs California. Today was our day to do that. We have these one-on-one conversations. I push back on the guys. We've got 3 VPs that run operations. I'm looking at their financials, and I'm saying, where are we? Why are we? What's happening here? What are you doing with this? Why is this category out of line with budget? What's happening with this? So what do? They go, some things they know, some things they go, I don't know. Well, do you think they want to have that same conversation the next week? No. That's an uncomfortable conversation. They're smart guys. They want to know the answer. They go back to their people and say, all right, here's what they're asking me. They're asking me this. We don't have a report for that. Well, figure one out. So the whole organization is running around trying to figure out these reports that, frankly, I am generating. And it took me a while to figure out it was my fault. So we finally said, well, that's not going to work. Let's do something different. So we got our controller, and our CFO, and our IT guys involved, and they all put together this suite of reports. They generate. Field staff doesn't have to generate it. I have told my guys I will not ask you questions that are not something you can answer me from the reporting we're giving you. My fault. I gotta own it. And as I'm telling the story to their whole group today, in the one group, I'm watching the VP sit in the back go, I know. Catching up. But look, that's part of it, man. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you don't screw it up, doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, doesn't mean you don't have problems. You're going to have it. Just own it. And the last thing is, you're not going to solve all this tomorrow. You're not going to become a great leader tomorrow. You're not going to do it next week. You're not going to do it next month. The term I always use is tractor work, man. Anybody ever plowed the tractor? How exciting is that? Not.
They got me out of them.
Yeah. How many acres? How many acres did you? What's the biggest field you ever plowed at once?
10 acres.
10 acres. That's nothing, right? We've got a 500-acre field. You got to be patient to get through 500 acres in a tractor. It only goes about 3 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour plow. That's a lot. But ultimately, you get out at the end of the day, and you're at the other end. Right? So I think that's a lot. That's the way it is with leadership as well. You're going to grow that slowly. You're going to grow that intentionally, experientially as well. It's not all something you can read out of a book. You got to be in the middle of those situations. At some point, you could ask, Bob, how much have you learned over the last 2 or 3 years from the school extension program? Could you even put it in a book? It's significant, but there's a lot of ways to learn it. Okay. Any questions on that overview first? Because we're going to go down into the heart of the matter here, which is the strategic planning part. Okay, so far? Okay. Well, there's a couple of questions there. Why should you do it? Why should you do strategic planning? What is it? I'll start calling on you if you don't answer. That'll be less fun. What is strategic planning? What is it? It's okay if it's wrong. Just we'll stop.
Basically taking a look at your strengths and your weaknesses and where you are now, where you want to be in 5 years, and how you get there.
Okay, that's part of it. Certainly.
When you figure out where you're wanting to go, you develop some form of strategy. As simple as that sounds, I'm not sure how else to put it.
That's right. It isn't any harder than that. In principle, you're here now. You want to be there. You've got to have some strategies to get there. Is that it?
Strategies.
Yeah. So why do you do that? Why would you have a strategy? Why would you have a strategic plan?
Stay focused.
Okay, yeah.
Hard to,
Focused.
hard to succeed if you don't have a strategy. Hard to, like he was talking about in chapel today. If you don't have a plan, you're gonna fail.
You know, we say that. Do we really believe it?
Maybe we just don't do much about it, probably.
We don't know much about it, do we? You would be amazed at how many companies operate with no strategy.
If you think of it as a roadmap, you might know where it is that you want to be, but if you don't have the map and follow the directions to get there, you're just going to be aimlessly wandering around.
Yeah, so what happens is your organization is larger. So you're a congregation of 500, and you don't have a verbalized strategy. What happens?
Confusion.
Members are confused. What happens from then?
No direction.
You're gonna decline.
You go into decline. So what? And then there's all sorts of reasons why that happens. So I think we're doing one thing, you think we're doing another. Are we ever going to have a conflict? We might.
Daily.
We might. So you think we're doing one thing, I think we're doing another. We're both strong personalities. And I say, I'm fed up with waiting on this group. I'm going. People ever do that? So what's leadership do? Whoa. What are you doing? Who said that was okay? Who approved this $5,000? Where did we spend it? What happened? That's happened here years ago. Look, that's just part of organizations and people. So strategic plan, you want to align your organization for success intentionally. That's really the summary of what strategic planning is. You want to align the organization for success strategically. You want to do it on purpose. Okay? And there's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of models out there. And really, we kind of answered question 2 there, so I'm kind of skipping that. But there's lots of models out there. Strategic planning models people have developed over the years. There's what's called just a basic strategic planning model. That model it's very low tech. It basically says this. What's our mission? To sell widgets. What 3 things are we going to do to sell more widgets? A, B, and C. Done. Ready to break. A lot of people use that, especially smaller organizations and especially organizations that are not mature. And as you know, churches are the same way. There's books on this. Companies, there's a bell curve. It's a growing organization, it's a mature organization, it's a declining organization, all those kinds of things. So at some point along the way, you got to figure out how to spin that thing back up to stay at the top of the bell curve again. Churches are the same way. So as you go through these processes, the strategic planning becomes more integrated, it becomes more difficult, more detailed, those kinds of things. But a lot of people start with this idea of a basic strategic plan. The next level is It really is it's basic, but then it takes it to the next level. That's really all it is. It's called a goal-based strategic plan. So you take those things, right? So we said, here's our mission, here's our vision, and here are the 3 things we're going to do. But which are the most important? Which should we do first? Where can we get the most bang for the buck? Which should we put the most money toward? We'll talk about budget relative to strategic plan here shortly. So that's really kind of the second piece. So you can see it's kind of an evolving approach. The third one is an alignment model. It's a little bit different. So it's really an alignment model is for those companies that are very internally focused. Okay, so the process-driven companies. A lot of manufacturers use that type model. It's inwardly looking. It says, okay, here's the stuff we have. Let's tweak. Let's move. Let's turn. Let's pull that lever a little bit. So it's not a remaking the organization year after year. It's more of and I actually kind of like this model because it's a continual model. And we'll talk a little bit in a minute here about what a strategic plan is and how often you should use it and that sort of thing. But this idea of an alignment model, the organization constantly asks itself the question, what can we tweak, what can we move? Okay? So there's a lot of value to that, I think. But it's a cultural thing. You have to have the right culture to be able to pull that off. There's another model called a scenario planning model, which basically says, with the facts we have at hand, what things will happen? Well, it's either A, B, we'll just make 3. It's A, B, or C. Okay? We're going to put a strategy in place for the eventuality of A, B, and C. So it's really a contingency planning type approach. So scenario planning basically says, let's see what we think might happen, and let's make sure that we are ready for any of them. So, number one, you have to have the kind of world where you can define them. Okay? Every organization doesn't have that. I think a lot more have it than think they have it, because there are things you can anticipate more than you think you can sometimes. A lot of people are so based in, if I don't have all the facts laying in front of me, we can't possibly know what's going to happen. There are companies that make a living off looking at trends and understanding what eventualities may occur. So I think that scenario planning model fits some places. It feels, honestly, to me, a little more defensive. I don't like it because of the defensive idea of it. It's that these things could happen to us. How are we all going to react? Kind of approach. I'd rather be ahead of it, and we'll get to the model I use here in a minute. Now, the fifth model is called an organic model. This is the kumbaya model. That's what I call it. Hey, man, let's all sit around and figure out what we think is a cool thing to do. You know, it's not quite that bad, but it's less formal. It's more about this idea of lessons learned. Yeah, you know, we did that last year at work. Let's do that again. Or we did that, and it was really not very good. Let's not do that again. It's that kind of approach to it. And there are companies, and I'm telling you, a lot of the newer tech companies, that's how they do it. They got a bunch of 20-year-olds in there, no offense to those of you in your 20s, and that's how they see the world, right? They all have childcare and gyms in the Google office, and they all have a different way of looking at the world, and it's more like that. It's a real loose, less formal approach. They don't want to sit in a boardroom and have a conversation like this. It's not how they're built. It's a generational question. So I find that interesting. Now, I will tell you the model that I use, I don't know that you'll find it anywhere because we kind of made it up over the years. I had a guy I worked with, another VP at American Civil Constructors when I worked there, and we kind of tooled our own model. We call it an outcome-based model, and you'll find outcome-based models. But we basically stole some of all of these other models that we liked and put it together and made our own. So this is a model I've used for 15 years. Still use it today with our group. We can talk a little bit about it. Let's kind of work through the pieces here. We're going to use Bear Valley as an example, okay? So do you remember, some of you have been here a little while, some of you haven't, but the mission and vision statement that the elders put together a few years ago? That's step one in an outcome-based strategic planning model. That's what they're doing. They're defining up front, what are we really trying to do here? Ultimately, what's our purpose as an organization? Let's get to the heart of that. So when you start a strategic planning approach, and some of you are going to go places, they're going to look at you cross-eyed, and they have no idea what you're talking about with this. You're going to have to walk people through this concept. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that everybody is clear on what the purpose and mission of the organization is. If you don't get that right, the rest of it is going to be a catastrophe. You got to get that right. It's worth hours of conversation. You got to be patient with this stuff. We had a senior management retreat in May for our organization. Just a quick history. The company as it sits now was sold as a carve-out from a much larger company. The company we were with was about $350 million in sales, 3,000 employees. Our group is now 30 million, 450, 500 employees. We were pulled out of that larger organization. That is a really challenging thing to do. You basically are taking a company with that type of revenue and that many people, and you have zero systems. You have zero operating system. You have zero processes. And you have to create all that stuff. We didn't have accounting people. We didn't have HR people. All that was handled by corporate, right? So all that goes away. So you got this big challenge. So when we first were carved out and sold, I could not get past that with my guys, that first bullet. They couldn't do it. They were so distracted with the nuts and bolts of the day, making sure we got through the day without something, falling apart. We had to kind of do it in pieces. So you kind of have to be patient with it. Don't expect, The first time you're at a place and you say, we're going to do strategic planning, you're going to get through it in 4 hours, and by lunch you all leave and it's great, and you're done. It could take years. It could take months. Just to get that first one ironed out is going to take hours. And it may be that you already know what it is. It doesn't do you any good to tell them, we don't need to talk about this, I already know what it is, this is it. Because if they don't believe it, and they don't buy into it, and you don't have time to let everybody talk through it and get to the same place you've already gotten, it will not be effective either. They will not follow you. They will always say, that wasn't my plan. Whose was it? That was yours. The way we run budgets in our company is very different than a lot of companies. Our people build their budget ground up, and they own it. I've had years where halfway through the year I said, you're missing your budget by a long way. Well, truth of it is, it wasn't my budget. That was corporate's budget. They gave it to me, and I never agreed I could achieve all that. But it's no different with strategic planning. That's your strategic. No, everybody has to be involved in that first piece, and you've got to make sure you get consensus there. It's really challenging. I know it looks like it's not. It's really challenging. I went through this with a nonprofit. I was on a board of a nonprofit 4 or 5 years ago, and we went through this process. They'd never done it before. So we had 15 board members. 10 or 11 of them ran significant companies. So this is not a bunch of namby-pamby folks. They all have a strong opinion. It took us like three-hour meetings to get the first one done. I thought we'd never get there. It was hours and hours and hours. And when we finally got there, everybody went, yep, I'm good with that. Everybody good with that? We're good with that. And then we were able to go through the next steps of the process. So, the next piece is, where are we now? This is really challenging as well. It's probably less challenging in a non-profit-driven organization than a profit-driven. Okay? Profit-driven, when people will cover stuff up. And they will tell you things that are not true because they think that's what you want to hear. So when you start doing a where are we now evaluation, it usually has a lot more shine on it than it's real. But it can happen in other places too. How are things at Bear Valley? They're great. How's school? Awesome. How's the extension program? Awesome. Everything's great. Is it? No. It's not. It's hard. And we've got issues. And until we say it's hard and we have issues, can we put together a strategic plan that's going to effectively assess what they are and deal with them? Well, no. You have to know what they are first. That's a really hard thing. Somebody mentioned a minute ago, strengths and weaknesses. Really what you're talking about is a SWOT assessment, a SWOT analysis. This is where it really gets fun. So I'll ask you some questions. Bear Valley Church of Christ, what are some of our strengths? What do you think?
Guys like you.
That's very kind of you. I'm not grading you, however, so you should just
A lot of teachers.
A lot of knowledge.
good teachers, a lot of knowledge. Yeah. Visited other places, sat through Bible classes and thought, you got to be kidding me, this is it? Because you got so used to this. How often does that happen? When you come back here, you're like, man, missed that. Right? Yeah, what else? Somebody said something over here.
Great eldership.
Strong eldership. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Do you think there's eldership problems elsewhere? How many people do we have in our congregation now that weren't here a year ago because they've run from elderships, there were problems?
I've noticed, as far as the school goes and the congregation, when I follow along with what's being taught or said, it's according to Scripture.
Okay, so consistency and accuracy. Those are strengths we have. Okay. What weaknesses do we have? Now, it's interesting. No, you laugh, and this is what happens in a strategic planning process. Nobody wants to say it.
Are the elders going to hear this?
Why don't you want it? Right. You say, what's going to happen if I say this? What is everybody in the room going to think? What is my teacher going to think? What are the elders going to think? Right? It's hard to get to the heart. And this is where you have to really divorce yourself from the emotional aspect of this, okay? This isn't about me. This isn't about you. This isn't about our personal panache with this group. But you got to get to the heart of this. This is the hard stuff.
When you said that, the first thing I thought of was the weakness could be me. And I was like, wow, yeah. So I'm gonna have to look at myself, make sure that what I'm doing is strengthening the organization.
Yeah. Are you
or
part of
I'm doing it right.
part of the solution or part of the problem?
Right.
Because you're not in the middle, are you?
No, you're one of the two.
Yep. You know, one of the things I talk to our folks about, we do not have time to have bleacher sitters.
To have what?
Bleacher sitters.
Call them two warmers.
You can't have it and have a good organization. The more folks you have that just sit and watch, the less effective you are. So, we'll get to this in a minute, but remember this. We're going to talk about this think souls idea here in a minute, okay? Wes, do you have a comment too?
No, actually, you just said you need participation, and that can be a strength or a weakness here at Bear Valley. Some would say that have come over here, boy, you guys really have got some things going. And then there are some that have gone away going, I've been here for 3 months and never been asked to do anything. I want to participate. So it can be an either or as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I don't know what the people that go away and say I haven't been asked to do anything, I don't know what their perspective is on this. But I did before we got to our strategic planning for this fall, I did a company survey. It was a 10-question survey to everybody that has an email address in their company. And it was interesting, the results came back. One of the things I noticed, a number of people said, well, this is a problem, and I'm going to be curious to see what management does about it. What do you think management does about it? There's no Oz behind the curtain. Management's not going to do anything about it. Management can only talk to you, and we can all work together to figure out what plans we can all implement as a group to solve it. And if you're not part of the solution, then why are you here? I'm not going to solve it for you and issue an edict that makes everything okay. That's not how it works. You're part of the solution. So the plans we put in place that we're rolling out that we talked about this morning in our group, everybody has a role, and we've broken it down. As in this position, here's your role. In this position, here's your role. And the first thing I said was, here's my job relative to this new plan. Here are the things that I've placed on myself. Here's what we're going to do. So we all are part of it. So it's interesting. Sometimes it's because they said, I'm going to wait and see what you tell me to do. Which is really hard for a leader, because you've got to somehow get those people engaged. You don't want to offend them, but you also got to kind of go, let's go. You know, come to me and tell me what you think you can do. So it's a really hard thing. And I think it's really hard. And by the way, there's a distinct difference between corporate America and the church, okay? This is a volunteer organization. People are here because of their heart. They're here because they want to be, not because they need a paycheck and they want to go at Christmas presents. So the motivations are different, and I get that, okay? So it's a different thing to manage. And I've been fortunate. I've been on a number of boards for nonprofits, which were all volunteer organizations. They weren't church-based, but they were all volunteer. And it is very different how you have to manage through those things and how you have to lead in those organizations. What are you going to do? Threaten them with their job? Have to pay in half? So anyway, really tough thing. What are the weaknesses? Because we really only got one that was kind of gutless over here. Me. It must be me. Yeah, right.
Well, it's hard to think about this as a weakness, but being such a big congregation, it's hard for the eldership to be able to have that personal relationship with everybody and be able to shepherd like a smaller congregation would be able to know exactly what's happening at different times, whereas with a big congregation.
Talk to Tony Rayburn, he'll call that touches. How many personal touches are we getting done here, right? And actually, Tony's been putting together, and my wife's part of this team, that's going to increase the touches, because you're exactly right. The elders, there's only a handful of them.
Yeah.
And the truth of it is, man, we got a lot of folks on the edge in terms of membership here. We tend to look at the ones that are there every week, and we help each other out. But there are a lot of folks on the edge. It helps when you lead singing. I watch who runs out the door when the communion is done. I watch who runs out the door right before the closing prayer because they don't want accountability. It's not just because some of them don't want accountability. There's a real challenge for the eldership there. How do you have enough touches? So Tony's been working with them to put this plan together and grabbing a number of more outgoing folks in the congregation to increase those touches. I think it's really interesting you found that as a weakness because they have also seen it as a weakness and are putting something in place to try to assess it.
I would think the school would be a challenge in that the identity of the church. If you're not identified with the school, who are you? And that's a misconception.
Yeah. And over the years, Russ will speak to this as well, we've been here for a long time, but there have been times where there was animosity between the church and the school, especially during tough budget years. And people say, wait a minute, I thought we were giving the school X number of dollars. Why did we give them more? Well, because some of the guys couldn't raise enough support. Well, why is it the church's responsibility to backfill that hole? Tell them to get out there and figure it out. I've heard those conversations. There's been lots of those things. So it became that, is the tail wagging the dog here? Right? I think we're in a lot better place now than many years ago. And some of that was even when you were here, if you remember. But yes, is that a constant challenge? That can be a weakness. It's one of our greatest assets. You guys being here is one of the greatest assets of this congregation. It can also be a weakness. Okay.
Been here for 2 months now, and
Long timer. Yeah.
so
That's
right
okay.
away in
Good
the
fresh
first 2
approach.
weeks,
Yep.
noticed different things, and I had to see personally. I think I had to wrestle with it because being in churches in New York, San Francisco, the DC area, I don't consider Colorado backward or something, but just moved here. And one thing I noticed right away, that was weighing on me a lot is the church demographics of the church. It doesn't reflect the demographics of Denver.
Mhm.
And I think
It's really white here, isn't it?
no, I'm not getting.
Look, no, that's the truth.
The real world out there.
No, you're exactly right.
And I'm used to congregations where it's people from all nations.
Yeah.
And,
So we asked ourselves the question, are we doing our job right then?
and
Apparently there's a hole here.
about a month ago, Neil preached, the growth in churches of Christ is only from people moving from one church to another. Yeah. That's reflected.
Absolutely.
We're not sharing our faith. We should have a solid congregation like, leadership like Bear Valley. We
So
should
look at where we
have
sit.
these services.
Look where we sit demographically here. What's our Hispanic?
Zilch.
Zilch. What's predominantly the demographic within 5 miles of here? Hispanic.
5 blocks.
What are we doing? That's a good point.
Also, as a new person, nobody's really taking the time to. I've tried to get to know the leaders, but nobody's really taken the time to get to know me as a person, as a newcomer. I don't want to be another number, I think.
Yeah, and this is interesting, okay? We'll use this one just for a second here. We look at it as a weakness. We say, hey, maybe we're not getting to know the new folks. Well, this is something might tie together, right? You're a guy that's coming to the school, you're here, and you're gone in 2 years. How much time am I going to spend? I've been here 20 years. Really? I'm going to spend time to get to know all you guys, and you're going to blow out of here again, and there'll be a whole new crop of you again. There is some of that, right? So you talk about strengths and weaknesses of the school. The transient nature of the school can be a weakness, and that kind of ties into this. Another piece of this, maybe this is it too. And look, I'm just talking out loud. This is just an example for us, okay? So back to this elders' touches thing. They're struggling to keep up with keeping the people on the edge in the fold here. Do they have time? Or are they taking the time to get to know you? You're new. Maybe that's part. See, a lot of this stuff begins to tie together. That's the stuff you start finding when you start doing strategic planning. You start doing assessments, and you start seeing relationships between things. So the stuff I rolled out with my guys this morning, there's 3 major plans we rolled out. Each of those plans addresses at least 3 weaknesses we have in our company. Each one, 3. Because we found the same thing. As we talked through things, we said, man, this stuff is all tied together, and that one affects that one, and that one affects that one, and how do we How do we deal with all that together? Well, let's find some solutions, because we can only do so many things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But how do we get the things in place to have the most effective solution that can resolve the most things, the fastest, right? So anyway, that's a really good example. Okay, so we won't beat this place up on weaknesses anymore. What about opportunities? What opportunities are there for this organization? And sometimes this is a function of the first two. We do not represent the demographics of this organization, of this area, within this organization. Why is that? Is that an opportunity for us? Absolutely. Absolutely.
What Nathan put together, spearheaded, was a good start.
Terrific.
Saturate the neighborhood.
Terrific. Yeah. It's not a one-time thing either, is it, Nathan?
No, sir.
This has got to be a process, and we can't quit on that. Right? You start somewhere, and then you got to plod through this thing intentionally. It's part of the strategic plan, right? Absolutely. And that's an opportunity for us, and we can change this thing. What other opportunity do you see?
I don't look at it as, okay, you're here for 2 years and gone, that's.
And I don't either, by the way. I was using that as an example.
No, I'm just saying I never look at it that way, because enjoy the process, When it comes, it'll come, But at the same time, I feel like as Bear Valley students, there's so many, holes we can plug where we can be used, because I see, I'm not, this is just I'm not afraid of, saying what I think.
Really?
Yeah, really.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that everyone sits.
I like this
in
guy a
one.
lot. He's a lot.
I've moved from one to another because I want to get to know people.
Yeah.
Old, young, it doesn't matter what color, what,
No, that's a great thing. So the opportunity is, we have these guys who are here, one focus, man. You guys are dialed in. Boom, that's what I'm here for, that's what I'm doing. Why wouldn't we take more advantage of that?
I mean, it's great, studies is there and this, but, I'm not here for, losing sleep over what I got 89 or I got 90. I mean, hey, I did my best, I learned something.
So he really doesn't care about what your rating gets in here, so keep that in mind.
My question kind of
What
was,
I earned,
my question was about the opportunities. Are we asking what opportunities are available to strengthen our weakness? Is that what we're?
Not
Is that
necessarily.
the
What
question?
opportunities are available for this organization,
Okay.
right? So at a point here in a minute, we'll kind of get to another place in the conversation that will help clarify that a little bit. But the idea is, what things are there that we could do? What things are out there? What things are in the world? One of the things I always encourage our guys to do, we have folks that are very involved in our industries, okay? So they're on boards, they attend meetings for these organizations, but they're not real good at looking outside of industry. So my question is to them, I don't care what company X is doing, they're our competitor. I care what Microsoft is doing. How are they doing that? They're wildly successful. I don't want to follow the guy who is a quarter step ahead of me. I want to follow the guy who's thinking outside, man, going, we're going to blow this up. What are we going to do? That's the kind of thinking. So when we think about opportunities, I think and we'll talk about scanning here in a minute, but it's this idea of looking around and thinking, what's really there? What's available?
For our
What can we do
organization.
for this organization? Yeah. You have a question?
Coming back to, what Chris identified as a weakness, not knowing other people, two things that are opportunities there. If you always are sitting in the same place in the auditorium, move around, get to know other people that are in the congregation, because it is a big congregation and there are a lot of people to meet.
That's in Hezekiah. You have to sit in the same place. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't realize that. I had a thought, but I died alone. The second is, opportunities for fellowship with one another to get to know each other better.
Yeah, because if you don't have relationships, real relationships, it's interesting. I went to a company a number of years ago as the director of business development for a $250 million company. And there was a client that we knew of that had a large job, and we'd done some work for him in the past. I mentioned to one of the guys, I said, hey, I'm going to go see so-and-so, this client. He said, you don't need to do that. I said, what do you mean? He said, we already know them. I said, oh, when's the last time you talked to him? Not kidding. He went, let's see, 1992. Hey, when did we do that so-and-so job? It was 1992. I said, so okay, what if that's how you handled your relationship with your wife? How would that go? You had a doctor since 92. And of course, he made it deal. Probably better, but notwithstanding that comment. The point is, relationships are how you make things move forward, internally and externally. So we start trying to build relationships with the community. But if we're not tight within our group, it's going to be a lot less successful once we start leveraging that outside.
Well, this, when they had the vision of this congregation at the very start in the school preaching in '64, the preaching started. It's not until 30 years later till we all of a sudden go, hey, let's try an extension school for whatever opportunity that gave us. Now we can't stop the fire. And so that's an example of just thinking outside the box and looking at an opportunity that we may not have had the vision. They didn't have the vision before. We may not have had it up to a certain point. But there was a time where somebody said, you know what, let's look at this. Let's at least be receptive to the idea, which I think is how it happens with many years.
Yeah, so here's the question I always have then. What's sitting there now that we haven't figured out?
Exactly. Exactly. I would like to say that the girls' higher encampment would be an example of just saying, you know what, we started this idea as sort of a copycat to the FPTC boys that were coming here.
Because there are no new ideas, only stolen.
Exactly, and so I stole the idea and said there's nothing for girls. Well, I got 3 girls. I can't send any boys to the FPTC, and I said we need a spiritual. We started this thing, and it's going to be in its 5th year. We've done no marketing whatsoever, and we had 60 girls last year with no marketing from all around the United States and from other countries. An idea that who knows where this thing will go. Travel far on it as you can.
Opportunities. Okay, we got to move here. Threats. Threats. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What are threats to the organization? Sorry?
Satan.
Hello. Big threat. I mean, look, we know the more successful we are, how much more attention is he going to pay to this deal? We're asking for it. I don't know, you're like I am. Fine. Let's go. But we need to understand, the more successful we are, the more we're asking for him. Because he's going, uh-oh. I do something about that. Yep. So Satan is a threat. What else?
False teaching, if you're talking about the church. But again, that could be a tool of Satan. But
Certainly. Certainly. False teaching.
Well, going along with the weakness I said, you know, with such a big congregation, you may not notice a conflict until 30, 40 people are already involved in it. And then it's a huge conflict that you have to deal with. And it's a huge threat that can, you know, threaten the...
Yeah, so internal conflict.
Yeah.
And actually the point I'd like to make from that is there is a relationship many times between the weaknesses and the threats. Okay? The weaknesses can become threats if left unattended.
The ever-growing competition for our attention. You know, I'm not going to come back on Sunday night because there's an interesting football game on or something like that keeps the group strengthening and growing together.
Okay. Attention deficit, yes. So you start digging into those kinds of things, right? And this is where the art of this starts to come in. So we say, hey, there's a lot of competition for people's attention. So how do we get people? We got to have a different level of commitment. That's one of the answers to that. We have to take people to a different level of commitment, starting with me.
Me?
Right? Yes.
Some of the weaknesses we've talked about, some of the threats then would be the naysayers and the negative Nellies, as I like to call them.
I've got an account manager in the North Bay, outside San Francisco. I don't care if I tell him we need new toilet paper. He will have 5 minutes of why we can't. That's what the guy is. Now, we use him as the contrarian, and we dismiss him at some level, but sometimes he has good stuff. So sometimes you can take advantage of the contrarian. I'm actually on a board, and I asked somebody to come in on the board. She's a contrarian. She's also one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. So my conversation with her was, you realize we don't agree on a lot of things, but I'd like you to be on this board because I think that makes us all a little sharper, all a little better, and we'll get to a better conclusion, but don't wear it like a badge. So there's an advantage to it in control. but it certainly can be a weight. So this comes back to this idea of leadership. Leadership has to manage and control that. You can't let that run amok. You talk about all of a sudden you got 30 people. 2 people say, we can't do that. They tell 2 other people, and they go, yeah. All 4 of us think we can't do that. Well, you know, I had dinner with these people the other night. The 8 of us think we can't do that. Now what do you got? Now you got a problem. So leadership has to be understanding of contrarian and let people talk and then convict them that the direction is correct with or without them. It's a real challenge. And that's where it's really hard. Back to that, do you really want to be a leader? You think those are going to be fun conversations? Maybe not. Maybe not.
Threats to the organization, undealt with issues. If we aren't willing, even weaknesses, if we aren't willing to
Ignore the problem and it will go away. Does it ever go away?
you wait for spring to do the cleaning.
Yeah. What happens to the problem if you ignore it?
Cancer, it spreads.
What happens to the problem?
Bigger,
Hello.
like a virus.
Always gets bigger. Ignoring it doesn't solve it. When I took over the organization that I work for now, I had 2 senior vice presidents in 2 different states who would not speak to one another. Hadn't spoken to one another in almost 6 months. We're not that big a company. How can we have 2 senior executives who physically will sit in the same room across from each other and do like this? Wouldn't even look at each other. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't look at each other. We'd go to lunch. Opposite instead. I'm like, really? You gotta be kidding me. How does that work? Well, as it turns out, it had been a problem for over a year. And it started out with some conflict in a senior manager's meeting that went unresolved. And people said, it's just them, they'll be fine, whatever. Well, next thing you know, they started getting camps. And then you have 2 multi-million-dollar divisions who won't talk. That's a problem. And I'm telling you, it took me a lot longer to unwind it than it took for it to wind. I mean, it came to the point of, if you don't make the change, I'll find somebody who will. Anybody want to have those conversations? Those are no fun. They're absolutely no fun. And if you lead correctly, you don't have those. You don't have to get to that point, usually, occasionally. But you want to try to avoid that, so unresolved problems. Okay, yeah, one more.
I was just going to say cowardice, and it's along those same lines, but a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but some leaders are afraid to have those tough conversations for whatever reason.
Well, for obvious reasons. It stinks. I mean, who wants conflict?
And also, I think
Who loves conflict? It's no fun.
Right.
And that's, and you're right. I mean, that's a challenge. You have the dynamic of an organization. Believe it or not, leadership makes a lot of difference in an organization. One leader can change the culture of an entire organization. Huge organization. The best example, look at Steve Jobs. That organization absolutely ran off of his heels. He had that much influence all the way through every root and tendril of that group. It was incredible. I think the guy was a goofball at some level, but at the same time, he also knew how to be involved in and he wasn't afraid to have the conflict, which is why he split with his partner years before. He thought the company should go a different direction. And he knew, because he had vision, that to get to that place, sometimes there has to be some conflict along the way. Look, this is one of the hardest things I think an eldership has to deal with in a church. I really do. How do you tell someone who is there by choice that they need to change their behavior and do it different? How do you do that without causing angst, difficulty between you? Let me tell you, being an elder of a congregation, that is a whole different level of leadership. It's incredibly difficult to be able to go through those and walk away and be able to hug each other around that and say, it's okay. It'll be okay. We're going to work together.
Have you ever had any experience as far as someone being under you come and say, well, you know, this company over here is doing this and it's working for them, kind of an outside influence that doesn't work for your company?
Oh, sure. No, I have all the time. No, look, what we tell people is, and this is what I'll tell them personally, I have 20 ideas a day. If I told you all the ideas I have that I think we should do, you all would quit. We can't as an organization absorb all of the horsepower of all the ideas we have as a group. Right?
Do I have any come into the company?
I'm getting to that. So people come in and they say, well, I have this idea. That's a great idea. You know, that doesn't fit our culture. Or it doesn't fit where we are in the bell curve. Right? It's not a bad idea. There's nothing wrong with the idea. Matter of fact, I think it's a great idea. Is it something we can implement right now? Maybe, maybe not. And there's lots of assessment that has to happen before you implement new ideas. Look, new things should not be implemented willy-nilly. I mean, they need to be intentional. You need to think through them. This is one of the worst examples we have in our country. You watch politicians, the things they implement. Look, I spent 6 hours yesterday with our insurance company that flew in here from Houston to go through the next level of how is this Obamacare thing going to impact companies. It's a train wreck. Make no mistake, it's a train wreck. I've never seen anything so goofed up in my life, and I've been doing this for 30 years. They don't know how they're going to implement it. They don't know how to tell us how to implement it. It's the biggest mess you've ever seen. So, you know, there's just so much bandwidth in companies. There's so many things you can do. You have to think through things, and so many things are not thought through. So, new ideas are great. You can't do them all, and something might be more impactful. So there's lots of ways you can talk through. You know, maybe there's something we're doing now that's going to conflict with that. Maybe we're not in the right place. Maybe we don't have the right resources. Maybe there's something else we need to get done first. Timing isn't good. There's lots of reasons why we're. I had a guy not too long ago. A project in Alaska. I want to go to Alaska. I think we can do that project. We're not going to Alaska. Why not? Well, we haven't proven you can take this business model to Utah yet. I'm certainly not going to go to investors and say I need $5 million because we're going to go do this project in Alaska, and we've only been able to do it within 30 miles of here. Who would do that? Is it a good idea to go to Alaska? Yeah. Should we go there at some point? Probably so. Is this the right project? Probably not. Wrong time. We got things we got to do first. Yeah, I get it all the time. And I encourage it. Bring it on. We'll talk about them. It's okay. And my folks have learned we're not going to do everything. We're not going to do everything I say either. It's just part of the process. So this next piece, this idea of environmental scanning, we're going to wrap this up pretty quick. We've got 20 minutes left here. So, but this is really just this idea of being aware of what's out there. Okay? Understanding the things that are going on. I don't know if you follow, but gas stations are going to start carrying E15 fuel. You hear anything about that? So it's 85% gasoline, 15% ethanol. So that's all great. Most modern vehicles are built to run that. But guess what? You know how much? I have an equipment fleet of about 500 pieces of equipment. Guess how many of them will run E15?
Mm-hmm.
Zero. So I'm sending gentlemen out who are Spanish speakers, mostly, with tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment that won't run on E15 to gas stations to fill up. How long do you think it's going to be before they put E15 in their own piece of equipment?
About 2 days.
Yeah. So they haven't instituted E15 yet. It's still coming. There's still some discussion about how they're going to label it, all this stuff. Anyway, that's an environmental scanning piece. We're already thinking about it. We're looking at it. We're reading about things. We're seeing what's out there in the world that could impact the organization. What do we need to do about it? Get ahead of it. That's why I spent 6 hours with the insurance people on Obamacare yesterday. It may change the way we renew our policy. It may change the way we hire and fire. There are tons of implications to that thing. And, you know, we're only a year away from implementation. You may say, well, it's a whole year away. No, it's only a year away. So environmental scanning is a culture. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying a minute ago. We want people to come to this organization and say, hey, you know what? I think the elders are having trouble with the law. We don't have enough touches. They're not getting enough people. We should do this. Oh, who's doing that? Well, this other one is doing it. It's how it works. Oh, maybe we should think about it. So you bring those ideas in. So you're constantly looking outside the walls of this place. How can we do this better? Using some other things that we see. How can we avoid pitfalls because they're out there and we happen to see them coming before they got here? There's lots of those kinds of things. So this idea of environmental scanning, it is a cultural question. It takes a long time to get that implemented. People don't think like that. You have to tell them to think like that. And then when they do, you have to reward them for doing it. So they go, that didn't hurt, I should do that again.
You said earlier when you started, you're open to new ideas, bring input, this and that. Let's do things differently. But then, just focus on Obamacare. I don't want to give my opinion either way, but I'm just saying, yes, it's something new, but if we don't do that, it's a train wreck. The healthcare costs are already eating up, a lot of our GDP, and it's projected.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into a long discussion about Obamacare, but I'll tell you this. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at 12 to 15% healthcare increases year over year, and I've got to pay for it, or I've got to pass them to my people, or I've got to eliminate benefits. It's a big challenge, so I don't disagree with you. I think the train was on the track to crash anyway. Is this the right answer? No. Should there be another answer? Yes. Should we do it the way we're doing it now? No. Do I appreciate what they're doing in principle? Uh-huh. But they're policymakers, and they don't run businesses, and they haven't determined the unintended consequences, and it's going to be a mess. And I don't have time it took me 6 hours sitting there with my eyes crossed yesterday to get the first level understood, so there's a lot to it. But anyway, good point. So, this last week, so we've gone through all this, right? We said, hey, here's who we are, here's where we are, here's our analysis. What do we want to be? What are we going to do? It's really simple in our company. There's 4 things. Everybody in the company that can speak just about knows it. 10% earnings, 90% retention, 0 accidents, build bench strength. That's it. That's what we do. It's not that hard. So all the things we do strategically, we'll get to that in a second, go toward one or more of those 4 things. That's it. You can ask any of my senior managers, they can quote you the 4 things right now. Because we've done that intentionally. We've made it simple. We've said, let's prioritize. There are a million things we could do. But as it all boils down, what are the most critical? What are the things that can affect things the most in a positive way? What's the heart of our business? How can we improve this? Those are 4 things. If we don't have 10% earnings, it goofs up the way our company is structured from a leverage standpoint and debt standpoint. I need to generate that kind of earnings based on what we're doing to be able to service the debt and be able to put capital expenditures back in the company and grow the business. It's not an accidental number. We know that number. 90% retention. Our sales force has to sell, at 90% retention, they have to sell several $1 million of work every year for us to stay the same. Okay? But if we want to grow the business 5 to 8% a year, that means they're going to have to sell almost 20% of our total revenue every year at 90% retention. What happens when we go to 85? They're going to have to sell 25% of the revenue. Well, we know what a salesperson can produce on the average. Do I have enough? Nope. Got to hire more. What's that? That's overhead. What does that do to the 10% earnings number? It reduces it. So all of these things all work together. So when you think about the organization and what things you put in place and how you prioritize them, understand they all work together. One affects the other, and you got to make sure you think through all this and you think about the consequences down the road of how they all work together. Okay? So this is when the rubber starts to meet the road, and this is where it usually falls apart. Okay, so what strategies are we going to employ to arrive at that? One of the things we determine with our organization is we don't have enough client touches. It's back to the point about touches of our members here. We don't touch our clients often enough. We all think we've done this for so long. This is how we do it. And everybody's okay with that. Well, what kind of society do we live in? It's infinite customization. If you don't do it for me, maybe somebody else will do it. This is what I want. And I want it purple, not blue. Okay. That's the world we live in. So if we keep trying to deliver generic service and we don't sit down and meet with our clients, we're going to lose. So we said we got to put some plans in place to resolve that, because that speaks to the earnings, it speaks to the retention, right? Those two goals are both accomplished if we talk to our client more. So we put a plan in place to intentionally talk to our client on a very regular basis. It's measured. It's on our intranet site. Everybody will know. There's frequencies, all these things. Even me. I met with 3 of our top 10 clients last week. My job is to meet, out of this plan, my job is to meet with our top 10 clients twice a year. I have to have 20 sit-down, face-to-face meetings with our clients. That's my part to play in that particular strategy. So that's kind of how this starts to break down. Now you're getting into the specific plans. So we've talked about those 4 goals. Now we've got to figure what plans are we going to do. What else about that? Well, somebody has to have assignment for that. Who's going to build the intranet site to track it? Javier and IT. Who's going to make sure it's happening? Branch managers. How fast are we going to do it? Rolls out January 1. How quickly are we going to make sure we are accomplishing this? We're going to do a quarterly assessment. There's no room for I didn't get it. There's no room for I thought you were going to. You watched the Lakers play the other night? Did you guys see the clip on ESPN? If you follow the Lakers, they've lost 8 games in a row. Okay? They're falling apart. Yeah. Kobe's so mad he can't hardly see. Some guy drives the lane, and it was the best thing I've ever seen on Sports Center. 3 Lakers all did this at the same time. Just picture all 3 pointing at somebody else. Like, dude, where were you? That was your guy. Oh, Mike, that was your guy. Right? There's a misunderstanding, a miscommunication. Somebody doesn't understand their role in the process here. So their defense is a mess. Look, this is where you really got to make sure you get this right. Somebody's name is next to everything you do. And there's a timeline associated with it, and there's a way to measure it. And if you don't do that, you wasted all the rest of the time. Because it will not happen. If you think that people are going to walk out, and this is how it starts. Look, everybody walks out going, that's a great meeting, man. You know, and I'm going to do this thing, and this is my job, and it's going to be great. And 3 months later, somebody goes, hey, how you doing with that? You know, I've been a little bit busy. And this thing happened, we got this new project, and then, well, you know, this happened, but I'm going to work. It'll never happen. People only do the things that they are going to have some degree of accountability on. And that's really the word to use with this bullet. It's a question of accountability. You have to take responsibility. People have to take responsibility for these things, or your entire strategic plan falls apart. Once again, this is a big challenge at a church. I love guys like Tony Rayburn. I'll go back to that example. Okay? He says, I think this is a problem. I'll take responsibility for this. I'm going to put the plan together. I'm going to group people to do it. And I'm going to measure it. Okay. Like that, don't we? I guarantee you we'll have something happen from that. And if we don't, he'll be the first guy coming and saying, it didn't, and here's why, and I got to do something different. Right? So that accountability piece is really critical. This is kind of a minor thing, but it can be a problem. When you go through this process, somebody needs to scribe everything you talk about. 6 months from now, you think you'll remember, but you will not. How did we do that? Well, John was saying something about, I don't know, and it turns into this blur, and, you know. So, you know, when we do strategic planning, we have the sticky sheets that go all over the place, and we're writing everything down, and the whole room is covered with these sheets all around the room, and we have somebody on the computer, and they're taking down almost word for word everything that's talked about, and we generate all those notes, we summarize them, we kick them out to every participant afterwards and say, here's what we think we heard, is this what you said? Do you see anything different? And people will push back, hey, no, you missed, we talked about that. Oh, yeah, so we add that to the notes. And then those notes are recorded as part of the strategic process. So now we know what we talked about. And nobody can say, we never talked about that. Well, actually, we did. Right there. And here's the email you got. Should I read it? All right, so we're back to the accountability piece. This is the next piece, and I appreciate that the eldership is doing what they're doing. Look, and speaking Sunday night, as a matter of fact, on leadership, but it's a different perspective, so I'll try not to step on that, but just to give you a little preview. You spend your money where you think it's important. So you go to the strategic planning process and you say, here are the things we need to accomplish. Then if you don't go through the budget process and assign dollars to that, you were kidding yourself. You must not have thought it was that important. We spend money where we think things are important. So the budget process should dovetail in behind the strategic planning process. At a retreat for a board I sit on Friday. We had an executive board meeting this morning, 7 o'clock, to talk about the retreat Friday. And we have a skeleton budget, but we're going to go through a strategic plan Friday, and the budget is subject to change based on the conclusions that we arrive at that strategic planning conversation. Because that's what drives the dollars. Plan drives the dollars. You look at what this congregation has done recently. There's a mission and vision statement. There's a 50-year goal statement. It says, here's where we want to be. This whole idea of think souls, I told you we're going to get to this in a few minutes. What do you think that is? What do you think that idea of think souls is?
Mission statement. Vision.
Okay. We already have a vision statement. It's a culture change, folks. You cannot get that mission accomplished. You can't get to that 50-year goal unless we change hearts, unless we change our culture, unless we become less internally focused and more externally focused. You can't do it. It's not accidental. The eldership is working this through, okay? And frankly, I don't know how much understanding they really have of the whole strategic planning process. None of the guys have been helping them through this. But that's the next step. That's an action item. It's a strategy. We have to begin, and we have to create a culture that says thinking souls is what we're all about. And if we don't do that, we don't need to relocate in year 20. We don't need another building. We don't need to buy a building to put school in, because there's only 5 people coming. We've got to get that solved. So that's part of this process. That's part of the process. Think about, and it gets less attention than it should, but think about the cultural aspect. When I say culture, I'm talking about it's more the soft things. Okay? It's the way people think. I talked to Neil about this a little bit. I'm going to continue to encourage him. I'm going to actually, I think, include it in my conversation Sunday night. But I think sometimes Neil can even be frustrated with the speed at which we're moving with this concept of think souls. You know what the average time to change a culture is in an organization in this country? 3 to 5 years. Most senior executives will tell you it's 5. And then if you think you can do it faster, you're kidding yourself. We've been doing it for what, year and a half now? We're still in the early stages of that culture change. We're going to get to the 50-year plan, but we got some things to do along the way. So, here's the thing. The strategic plan. What do you think happens when you're done with it? What happens?
Make another one?
Implement it.
Okay, implement it. Obvious conclusion. Then what?
Go back to the beginning and start over.
Are you ever done with strategic plan? Never. Do you think everything you implement is going to work the way you thought? Have you expanded the school's extension program the way you thought it would? Doesn't work that way. It's okay, you got to start. But here's what happens with a lot of organizations. Well, look, our strategic plan is done. Can somebody make copies for everyone, put those in binders, and send everyone to their office, and everybody gets a copy? Okay, comes to your office. You go, that's a real pretty binder. What do you do with it? It was on the shelf with the emergency evacuation plan that you hope you never have to use. And, you know, I mean, that's what happens. So what's the point of that? A strategic plan is a living, breathing document. It has to be something that's dog-eared, marked up, laying on your desk, laying in your office at your house. sitting in your briefcase, whatever, all the time. It's in my briefcase right now. It's part of it. Because it's going to change. Because things around you are going to change. Because you're not going to think of everything. We're not that smart. And it's going to morph. And it's going to become something a little different. And that thing kind of works. But you know, if we did that, it's going to be better. That's the way it is. So, that's kind of the last point regarding strategic planning is, it's not a shelf document. It's a living document. Something you work with constantly going forward. Okay? So, I'm done about 5 minutes at a time. That's pretty good, what about? Done 5 minutes ahead?
Good.
Better than others.